What is the connection between historically Black colleges and universities, their leaders, and today's charter schools? We're going to talk about it today on Freedom Friday. It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free. Welcome, friends and family. It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after this hour with Sharif El-Mekki and me. And we have two special guests today. We're talking about what is the long lineage, what I like to call Black educational capital, but what is the long lineage of leadership in education that still goes on today, but has roots and has echoes of historically Black colleges and universities. It's a very important topic for us to talk about right now. Number one, because we rarely know all that we should know about our history. Number two, it couldn't be more important right now for us to know everything about our history so that we can teach our children. And number three, it comes down to structure. What do we own? What is the infrastructure? What is our locus of control? What do we own in Black education that will allow us to educate our kids? So Sharif, I know you're ready-made and built for this conversation. You ready to do this?
Yeah, man, I'm excited. Anytime we can insert HBCUs into the conversation, I think is better. They're long, people want to ignore them. People want to, underestimate them. They punch well above their weight, and they're doing it for our people. And it's just a great history of community education and steadfastness, right? Like determination. So they encompass it all.
And I feel like we don't know enough about them.
Yeah.
I mean, just the bottom line for me is that we don't know enough about them. So friends and family, if you are watching this, you're going to learn today, because we done brought in the big guns. Like, Sharif and I like to do this talky talk thing we do. And we're fairly educated Negroes with gray in our hair and our beards and stuff. And, we got a little bit of the Chicken George. We understand what this life and everything is supposed to be about. But sometimes you got to bring in the young guns, especially when they got like doctor in front of their name and stuff.
And they got a little hang time, got little extensions in their scalp, you know what I mean?
Like they got the Prince set in the background, like Prince set in the background. But anyways, friends and family, welcome Kamar O'Gwen and Dr. Charles Cole, friends of the show. Both of these brothers. These brothers have written a report, and this is what I love about the world. So I love to support Black letters. When my people take the time to sit and write something and put it onto paper, I feel like an obligation, like it's my duty, number one, to share it, and if they're selling it, to buy it, and number two, to buy more copies for others if I got the extra cash. Because you know what? Black letters will save us. I'm just going to tell you this right now. Black letters are the things that are going to set us free. I always say,
as long as we read them.
Well, bro, I say the revolution will be literate, but only if you Negroes read it. Anyways, and you don't always do that. But these brothers wrote a report, and I want to show it here. Ebony Towers, written by Dr. Charles Cole and Kamar O'Gwen. This is a report that they have recently released that I think we need to lift up and share with each other and have some community learning around. And this is the characteristics of Black charter school leaders with HBC roots. Everybody studies lots of different things, but do we ever study, number one, our own leadership, where they come from, and what is their connection to our heritage and our background? So brothers, welcome to the show.
Man, thank you for having us. Yeah.
What were you about to say, Reef? You about to say, well, what were you about to?
No, I was just like, well,
okay, all right.
I was just agreeing.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I was just chiming in, and
Damn, we doing Pentecostal. Okay, all right. Anyways, brothers, what was interesting to you to write about this? To write this report and put it on record. What is the thing that you are putting on record for us to study and for us to care about?
I'll yield to my brother Kamar first, and I'll chime in after him.
Peace, everybody. Good to be here. I think one of the biggest things is that we need to begin to memorialize our work. And what I mean by that is that we are simply, although we wrote the report, we're standing on shoulders of folks that have come before us, right? So one of the things is we're simply carrying the torch of people who have actually put their pens down first. and making sure that we amplify their work. For us, it was really important to begin to think about a couple of things. And thinking about the leaders that we talked to and interviewed for the report, we realized very quickly that not everyone has the same level of know and interest in the history behind HBCUs, and you couldn't understand the work ethic, the plight, how those folks show up in their school communities without first understanding a little bit about HBCUs, their history, and the role that they have played historically for Black folks. And so those were the two objectives: to uplift and amplify those leaders and the great work that they were doing, and then also to begin to look back in the past and find some of those breadcrumbs that we don't go back to often enough, to say, what are the current challenges that these leaders are facing? What can we learn from our HBCU past and history to inform their practices today? Try to bring those together and codify those things in this report that we brought forward. Just recently been published.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I chime in with that, and I would just say, double click on everything that Kamar said. And also, I think in the symphonic world, we got to be a jazz club. And what I mean by that is, obviously the stuff that we wrote about like, to write about HBCUs is to write about Black educational history in the United States that a lot of people don't know. It's not just higher ed. And I think that today's culture kind of reflects that we have forgotten a lot of those things. But when I talk about, when you read this report, I'm not just talking about the words, I'm talking about the packaging of it and what you see in it and the colors and like the people that we tend to use. And I just feel like what made us want to do this is I've read a lot of research and a lot of it felt stale and stiff. It felt symphonic, and I appreciate the symphony. I appreciate a conductor and a symphony that's hidden. I love it. But there's something about like a smoky jazz club that's like lived in, and it feels like somebody's been there, and it feels like, you've experienced something, and you get to kind of get, you don't, just because it's a scientific work of art doesn't mean that that you got to strip the soul from it. So, I think that was one of the things that made it really special to me.
Brothers got soul.
Brothers got soul. So Charles also, and we're gonna drop doctors from now on. So this is
Charles is fine, brother. I can take it out the name right now if you want me to.
And don't text us in the background like call me doctor either. Don't do that, bro.
I've never done that in my life.
I didn't work these 4 years for this.
I don't mind.
So why charter schools? Someone might ask, why is this study about HBCU leaders, our HBCU alum who start charter schools? HBCUs are one expression of our agency where we have a lot of control over the product. And charter schools were meant and designed to be for many different communities to be able to get a charter to run your own thing. And I think what's interesting to me about that is, what do you do with it once you have it, right? Like, it's like a driver's license. Do you just drive around the block, or do you drive down the coast? Do you go to LA? Like, what do you do with the driver's license? Do you go to distance with it? So in this report that you have, I'm interested in that, like what people do with it and what do their roots matter. The summary of your findings say, we spoke with 13 Black leaders of charter schools and charter school networks to learn the top characteristics they identified from their HBCU experience that help them lead successful schools today. The leaders highlighted the importance of the HBCU institution while demonstrating how a strong HBCU aesthetic has informed a large part of how they educate and mirror a similar environment for their respective K-12 entities. That part is really important to me because, again, when you get the charter, what do you do with it? They're actually using it to make a semi HBCU type of experience for young people, specifically young Black kids. And you hear the top 5 characteristics that you all discussed: building and honoring a sense of community, utilizing their autonomy, authenticity, accessing HBCU networks and beyond to improve educational outcomes, and number 5, rigor and high standards. So in your summary of findings, these are the things that you took away of what people are doing with the driver's license. If we had to go through them and you didn't have a lot of time, which ones would you pull to the top that you think is the headline here out of these findings?
Yeah, I think they kind of went in order. I mean, community was just the one that just came up, and community had dimensions to it. So it meant a sense of community for those students and those families that are a part of that school. It meant community amongst teaching and for those educators and their practice and how they interacted with other leaders. But it also meant like a community amongst educated Black people. So they always talked a lot about, having support from their HBCU networks or the type of love and things that they would get. I think that would be the top one. And I'm gonna throw it to Kamar in a second, but I think even before then, you asked, why charter schools? And, I don't want to speak for Kamar. Well, I know we both have talked about this, and I think you all have heard me say this before. We actually are really agnostic, right? I don't really care about the delivery model. Actually, Kamar and I were on a panel in West Oakland last week, and it was at a charter school, but it was a Black event. That's where the kids and those families were. Ideally, it would be great if we had just Black wealth and we're able to just have a litany of on-code, networked, connected private schools, right? Where you didn't have to deal with government entities in any type of form. But in lieu of that, in lieu of not having that, charters tend to be an apparatus that we are able to use, a delivery model that you're able to use that gives you a little bit more autonomy, allows you to tie in and actually implement these 5 characteristics that we saw a little bit easier than it would be in a traditional in a traditional sector. So I would just start there. I don't want to take any thunder away, but I think that first one of community, everything else kind of emanated from there. And I think one of the most interesting things in this last part of my statement was, it was so interesting talking to these HBCU leaders, many of which that didn't know each other, did not go to the same HBCU, but they emanated this code. They emanated this level of belief in Black people. They emanated this Black history and was rooted in knowing, the history of Black people in this country as far as education is concerned. I thought that it was really fascinating how that system was able to recreate that. And we used to do that in K-12. That's how this all started. And I think that, on our last finding would be, if there were HBCU charter schools across the country for K-12, I think that we'd have a lot of positive changes and impacts in our communities and with our young people.
Yeah, I want to build on that just to add a couple more things, just in terms of some of the things that personally resonated with me. This authenticity piece, I think one of the quotes that are kind of bucketed in the report and pulled out and drawn out from the text is a quote from Asa Hilliard. And he really just talks about Black folks having to exchange their cultural democracy in order to go get what we can perceive as highly resourced quality education. And what these charter schools have allowed these leaders to be able to do is to maintain high standards, be well resourced, but also not have to have students and families to exchange their cultural democracy. They're able to maintain that within a milieu in their school environments. And then lastly, whether or not it's true or not, this perception and thought process about, I went to an HBCU and the mission of that university is to train me up so that I can go out there and help my people in whatever capacity, whether that is an engineer. We have a leader who was interviewed who was at NASA, whose family were first and second generation teachers, right? And he said, you know what, I still have a call to action. I'm going to leave NASA and come back. He doesn't do that at another school, right? He does that because he went to a HBCU and he knows that he has to fill that generational gap and he has to be the next one to carry that torch. And then lastly, not only rigor and high standards, I think in the report, it might read as if we're specifically talking about rigor and high standards from a teaching and being in the building standpoint, but also just a personal efficacy of how do you show up every day in a school setting. Those folks have a confidence on cloud 10 that you often don't find. And that battery and that charge comes from the legacy because they know that they have a long history to live up to. And they know that their HBCU network is there for them and they can reach out and pick up the phone when they need to be able to recharge and get that support. So those are the two things from things that we kind of listed out in terms of the big bucketed items that kind of came out from the research that really compel me and really stand out.
I'm leaving space for Reef because I got like a million questions. But
yeah, no, I mean, I love what the report and the soul of it, but also really the essence of HBCUs, and I think it's a couple things that come to mind. One, the first one and the last one, the sense of community as teacher to students, students to students, you know what I mean, to the families and communities. I think that is germane to when Black folks are successful in this hostile environment. It's when we tap into our community, and I think the HBCUs stand for that, and so many different, as you said, like the various dimensions of that. And I think the other one, what Kamar just mentioned around the standards and the expectations, not just for, oh, I'm the professor and this is what I have, this kind of standard. It's like understanding what the legacy is and how do I personally, wherever I fit in the HBCU realm and community, how do I live up to that, right? And then it becomes this self-generating cycle. When we nurture it, when we hone that, when we support that, it continues to manifest itself across hundreds of years, right? And that's the goal. And you can tell how powerful this is because it sounds very eerily similar to Black teaching traditions in, that Dr. Lassane talked about before, but in independent Black schools, right? Like some of that same messaging and pillars and characteristics that you hear in HBCU, you heard in K-12 independent Black schools. And what are HBCUs, right? Like they're these independent institutions that are there to nurture, support, and invest in the Black community. And I love the HBCU story because of how many of them started, like how Howard started, how Wilberforce started were two different stories. But where are they today? And like as they continue to to grow and develop and all of that. And then I say this with caution, Chris. Like HBCUs are so powerful that there's studies out there that show even when, like, for teachers, for example, when white people go to HBCUs, they actually become better teachers of Black kids, right? It doesn't mean we want them gentrified, y'all. Like, we don't want that. But, it just shows how powerful the HBCU experience is. It can even help other people address their mindset and thinking about Black communities.
Now, I want to take a minute on that. Let's sit here for a second in the HBCUs, because someone listening to this is not going to have the full story. And in your guys' report, you say, listen, we're going to give you some background on HBCUs, but this ain't exhaustive. But maybe we could crystallize it down for somebody who is landing on Earth today and they need to know historically Black colleges and universities. What's the headline? What's the importance? What's the historical importance about these particular schools that causes people to, one, have such great pride when they go to them or come out of them? I have a tag on my luggage that says, on my backpack that says, I love my HBCU. It was given to me at an event and I just loved it. And I do love my HBCU, even though I don't have one, and as I was coming out, I got stopped by multiple people. Number one, they wanted to know where they could get that badge, but they were like, one brother followed me all through the airport and I couldn't hear him because I had my AirPods on. And he was saying, I love mine too. And I couldn't figure out, what is this brother saying? I put on my thing and he's like, I love mine too. And I still didn't know what he was talking about. It took me a minute. I was, oh, he's talking about his HBCU. And then he said, which one did you go to? And I was like, see, now you had that. Now I got to take this badge off.
Why you diving deeper?
Yeah. Why you got to
stay surface level, brother?
Anyway, so I do want to start with this headline that you all had, the most important part of the history that you drew out. What is it? Give people the quick lesson on why this is important. Why are we even talking about? Actually, you know what? Let me just stop for a second. I want to back up. I do have a random thought because I heard Sharif did say about gentrification and whatnot. Do y'all know that some HBCUs have flipped and gone all white? Did you know that? Did you know that there are HBCUs where white parents started figuring out that they were actually really good values for the amount of money that you pay for the type of education that you get, and they flipped. So now there are historically Black colleges that are actually mostly white. People should look this up. And if you think I'm crazy, I'm not. Also, there have been white valedictorians of historically Black colleges or whatnot, again, proving that some people saw the value. They looked over the fence and they thought, oh, this is a good deal. And the last thing that I'll say, that HBCUs, you said they're independent schools. HBCUs are both private and public. So people know a lot about UNCF, but that's the private HBCUs. And they don't know as much about Thurgood Marshall, which is the public HBCUs. And I think that's really important.
Marshall College Fund.
Yeah, I think that's really important because they straddle the fence in a lot of different directions. Is what Charles is talking about with the Jazz. We invent. Right. Just tell us what the landscape looks like, and we're gonna Miles Davis this thing. Just tell us what the landscape is. Anyways, I'm sorry, that was my long run up. Y'all jump in and tell us what's the important HBCUs historically from your report. What's the headline?
I throw it to Kamar.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, just in terms of by definition, technical definition, I believe that HBCUs are classified as schools that started before 1964, whose mission is to serve and be there for Black students, right? So it's a very specific definition. So to be classified as that, it has a little less to do about who actually shows up and attends, but more to do with just the mission of the institution. On that last point, though, just in terms of, I want to be clear that HBCUs were never exclusionary institutions. They were always open doors. They were the way that they were because society was excluded, right? Like we couldn't go to other schools, and white folks couldn't come to HBCUs at a certain point in time because the law said that they could, just like Black folks couldn't go to historically white institutions, right? And so I want to say that and preface that the very large takeaway for me is that, Most Def kind of has this thing. One of my favorite albums, Charles started with jazz, is, Black on both sides, Yassine Bey, formerly, of course, Most Def at that particular point in time, where he says, if you want to know what's going on with hip hop, ask yourself what is going on with us. And it's the same thing for HBCUs. HBCUs are always and have always been historically in response to our plight and condition as Black folks in this country. And so most of us know the HBCUs that have started post-Civil War. But there were a number, I think a handful, at least 3 that were in the North that started pre-Civil War. So I underscore and start there with the history just to say that there has always been an ever-present desire for us to be educated. We knew that even when it was illegal for us to be educated, that our freedom was tied to the pages of those books. And so with that, you have just this proliferation of post-Civil War and what HBCUs meant. At that particular point in time, they didn't necessarily mean and weren't necessarily there for advanced higher education. They were there to essentially train two things. One, it was how do we begin to transition ourselves as being, for the most part, quote unquote, book literate and not having that. How do we begin to integrate ourselves into society and become more than labor commodities? So we understood that we had to have that knowledge to be able to do that. Secondly, we also understood that was our pathway to citizenship, but we needed to teach ourselves. And so the early HBCUs were all about making sure that we were training teachers, right? And getting our teachers to be able to go train and work with our students and being able to build us up and have those schools. And so at that particular point in time, it was less about higher education and more about the need for us to, actually start our own schools and to be able to educate our children. And then you look at, as time goes on, these debates about what HBCUs would be, whether or not they would be vocational or industrial education, or whether or not they would be liberal arts education and what that means. Those are the issues around access and control. You talked about in the beginning of the intro, whether or not we control institutions. That is at the crux and the heart of that. So those are questions that come up. HBCUs answers that question, and it answers the question of what we're able to do when we are in control of institutions. It also answers another question, is that what's the power of a university around research? Through our research, right, in HBCUs, we have solved and resolved massive problems, not only for ourselves, but massive problems for the nation, right? We brought down Jim Crow as a result of Charles Hamilton Houston and what it means to be a product of lineage of Howard Law, in partnership with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, those two institutions coming together to solve a national problem, right, that had implications for Black folks. Brown v. Board, that doesn't happen without Howard Law. What else? Just thinking about moving through the civil rights movement and what it means to be able to have access to other institutions. And I'll kind of end here and allow everybody else to kind of chime in, is that although there's progress that has been made and we have essentially forced the nation to respond to some of its wrongs and some of its ills, some of those things did not work in our advantage. There's a book called The Jim Crow Pink Slip, which talks about how post Brown v. Board, how we lost a lot of our greatest and brightest minds in education. Not only you see folks kind of going across the collegiate track from HBCUs to traditionally, historically white institutions, but that also happened in K-12 as well, where our teachers were seeped off and brought into white institutions because, let's be clear, that it was never about necessarily access. It was about resources. And instead of giving us resources, they said, well, we'll open the doors to you. And so it has implications there as well. The forecast in the future, really important for us, is to think about now that those things aren't present, now that we are not in a place where access is not a question, HBCUs are now actually having to defend their right to exist in ways that they haven't in the past, because it's not readily apparent for the larger milieu around why the need is still there when now we have access to these other institutions. And so that's just a 30,000 feet high gloss of just some nuggets that kind of came out of that historical work. And, you know, if we have questions in the back end, we can get into some more of the details around some of the specific timelines. But, you know, that was just my big take on some of the history. If you're just coming from space, as you said, and drop down just a couple nuggets.
I mean, one of the things you just said there, that it was about resources and not access, I think is a big, important point. Like, that's this whole other discussion that we should be having today, tomorrow. We should keep having this discussion, because there were these models of thought that it was about getting our just desserts, like being able to get the money to do what we need to do, the resources, exactly, what we need to do to educate our own, where there was this other group of folks who thought it was about selling out our own and buying into the bigger system. And there were arguments about wait and see what happens when you do that. There were like Black educators who were literally saying, don't do that. Like, think that through. Don't do that. There was Black teachers associations that were saying, think it through. Don't do that. So here we are all these years later now. And I'm wondering something that you guys found in your report. I'm wondering, HBCUs are the legacy and the lineage of that discussion having won. HBCUs produce a outrageous proportion of our Black kind of professionals, doctors, teachers, and others, right? Very large percentage of them. But what's their connection to K-12? If it wasn't for your report, I wouldn't be seeing because, like, listen, not everybody gets to college. It's great that we have historically Black colleges and universities, but how many of us get to them and get in them? And what's the K-12 connection? Did y'all come up with an answer to that? Like, what's the groundwork that we need to be laying so that they're like, listen, we all did the 90s thing where we saw a different world. They should have made that show a different world, because it was a world that was very different than mine. I liked looking through the looking glass to see how some Black folks were living in that Bill Cosby HBCU thing. I love that. I'm not, listen, don't get me, I'm not dissing that. All I'm just saying is it wasn't my lifestyle. And I wasn't on track to get there. So what's the K-12 component of us being all able to live that lifestyle?
Well, that's the beautiful thing, right? Is that, you know, when we did this report, you know, both Kamar and I, neither of us went to a HBCU. None of us went to schools that were like the schools that the leaders in this report led. And I think that the connection is, you know, Kamar just mentioned it, right? HBCUs were the farm where Black teachers came from. Like, it was Black people teaching Black people how to teach Black people. It was us taking accountability and responsibility of ourselves, even though we just came out of something that was brutal and demoralizing and dehumanizing. Again, I've said this a lot when we would do 8 Black Hands, is that, and you've said this a lot, Chris, we all point this out, that some of the fastest learning and growing came directly after slavery, when Black people got their freedom, and they took the collective coins they had and put that together. You know, everything about K-12 during that time kind of emanated from the feeling and the belief that you got from HBCUs. Like, here's the thing that I really left this report believing and thinking was, like, whether it was true or not, whether these were the most prestigious universities, whether these was the most pro-Black, whether these were, we can solve all the problems, or whatever the case was, the vast majority of the people that graduated from those institutions like believe so much in the power and ability of Black people, which led them to go do great things, which then was in those communities. Like, so if you were a Black teacher during that time that came from an HBCU, you had the respect of what quote unquote a professor may be getting walking through your street and through your neighborhood now. And there is such a belief that was built up in these people. And now let's look at our public school system now, right? It's usually about what we cannot do. It's about, what these kids are behind or what they can't learn. It is why both, like, I can graduate with a 3.83 GPA from my high school that I loved and played ball at or whatever the case was, and then get to my state university and be remedial everything, right? The standard was so low. There was a community rigor, not just a rigor like Kamar said around like the X's and O's or A, B's and whatever the case was. There was a communal rigor of what was expected of you, and a lot of that stuff I had to learn as an adult. I had to get that fortification as an adult, and I remember interviewing some of these leaders and damn near being jealous of like these kids and the experiences that they were having. Like, every young person should be able to feel what you saw and expressed when you watched A Different World, right? Like, there was just a sense of pride in knowing who you were. That didn't mean that they were immune from drama or issues or whatever the case was.
Yeah, he stole her husband,
but
her wife, and mad drama. That's crazy.
But they had it, and before we go, on page 7, Kamar wrote this, and I think it's one of the most profound quotes. You have to look at history to deal with some of these issues of the day. On page 7 at the top, it said, many African Americans believed the key to their deliverance was in the pages of books that they were forbidden to read. Education was a vital commodity on the battlefront against oppression, and historically Black colleges and universities served as the storehouses of artillery. We had shows and conversations about Florida banning books, and our artillery, our weapons, the things that we need are in those books. And I promise you, if there was more HBCU kind of led K-12 schools, I think that these debates that we seeing happen and play out and manipulate people here, there, and the third, and letting white mother groups kind of manipulate the message around, I promise you we'd have a more united front in regards to those things.
And can I just lastly, just to build on K-12, just the trajectory from K-12 to college, I think what is really standing out in terms of HBCUs punching above their weight is the ability to take what is sometimes perceived to be students who are not ready for college, right? And to be able to take those students and graduate them and send them off into professional careers at a way that other universities aren't. And so I think the prerequisites for HBCUs have always just kind of been two things. Do you want to learn, or are you willing to be taught, right? And so these metrics of meritocracy that are placed upon college admissions and what that means in terms of ranking and who gets in and who doesn't, for us, HBCUs have always been an open door, and that's the community open doors part of the report that we talk about, is that we're willing to accept you as you are, because we know that it's our duty and mission that no matter what happened, whether or not you had a great opportunity to go to one of the schools that Charles just mentioned that are being led by the leaders that you might have not had that experience. I didn't have that experience growing up either. Not only did I not have the HBCU experience as a college student, I didn't have that experience growing up as well. I was remedial, quote unquote, in classes as well. We kind of started off at the same university in some of the same circumstances, but guess what? There were Black professors and Black folks who were there at that campus who said, brother, I'm gonna make sure you make it. And I graduated in the top 1%, and that's not a flex, right? Summa cum laude. So how do you go from remedial? Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, how do you go from being remedial to being in the top 1% of the class? You do that because it's Black folks who believe in you, and you do that because the doors are open and they say, all you got to do is get here. And once you get here, we'll take care of the rest. That's the legacy, and that's the story that is the connection between K-12, not just the X's and O's and how that informs our practice in K-12, but it also still gives a student hope that says, dang, maybe I didn't get into that college of choice, but guess what? There's one down the road that's about me. They're about my people, and I can go there and I can get to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I really want to draw, down on, it's the presence of these Black teachers, in these HBCU that's concentrated, right? Because we know in K-12, the research consistently shows that a Black teacher and someone who's non-Black sees a Black child, and they have two different visions of what that child can accomplish, who that child is, what they deserve, all of the thing. And that's a consistent mindset gap between how people perceive Black children, Black youth, Black college students. And so that's a common thread around like the idea of Black youth not only what they deserve, what their aspirations are, but what their achievement level actually is. What are they capable of? And when you're in a concentrated area where there's significant numbers of adults who see you and not only believe in you, but believe that their success is tied to yours as a student, and you as a student believe that your success is also tied to them. That's a community, and that's a consistency that we see in the K-12 space when it's proliferation of Black teachers, and in the college space, right? And so, and yes, there are outliers and all of that, but what's consistent is around that that mindset and that belief in youth and what the capabilities are. Like, people can see that child, that youth, that college student, and automatically, if you just trace what their thought bubbles are, two different things, and often two different outcomes. So even when you're not there, and you have those type of professors, as Kamar described, it's absolutely critical. And you mentioned this, Kamar, but I want to make sure that we shout this out. It wasn't just that the early HBCUs were in the North; they're in proximity of Philadelphia. So I just want to make sure that we hone that carefully.
Yeah,
and if I would have known that we were going to talk about this, I would have made sure that I brought you some flags when I saw you in your office last week. I would have brought you two pennants of Cheney and Lincoln U. So, but shout out to the HBCUs.
I just want people to know that when Sharif goes off on that type of tangent, I just want to show you what the product of Philly is. The product of Philly should scare all of us. Here you go. Just take a look.
What is what is he bringing up?
This psychotic thing is what you get in Philly. This is the psychotic, child scaring, berserk.
Look, Zillow's using it to attract people. Like, there's an audience out there for that.
Philly said, when we want a mascot, we're going to go to the makers of the movie Saw, and we're going to have them create our mascot for children or whatnot. So don't let him Philly connect everything that you're talking about. Listen, there's this word, Charles, you're good with this, and Kamar, I'm sure you're good with it too, but I just know Charles harps on this sometimes about words and the words that we use. And sometimes I say this about equity. You say equity about 5 million times, and when everything is equity, nothing really is, right? This word authenticity seems to show up in a lot of discussions and places I am in. So what do you all, when you looked at how it applies to this report and to this project, what are you meaning when you're saying that authenticity was one of the key takeaways and findings that you had to look at when you talk to these leaders?
And Kamar and I spent a lot of time actually talking about that term and what that meant. And I'm gonna go first because I know he's gonna say something super prolific. So let me get this part out the way. But when we talked, authenticity has been bastardized as we know it today, and I think the same with equity and things like that. I think we have taken terms that had a real value and real meaning, and we have made them placeholders to kind of get things that we want that may not be, on code to that larger thing that we're all trying to get to, right? So today you have a lot of people performing authenticity. Well, if you're performing authenticity, then you're not actually authentic. What we meant when we looked at this was there was an authenticity around how these school structures felt, how these what these universities did, the quickness and mobility of being able to adapt education to deal with whatever its constituents and the people that it served were dealing with, right? So, when we talk about authenticity, one of the examples is it is authentic to teach young people that they come from a race of people that actually have been super resilient over and over and over and over and over again. And even in the history parts that we put in here, we show you where Black people would create something and then structures would come in, disrupt those creations, and then we would rebuild on top of it, right? And until it kind of got worn down. The other thing about authenticity was like, there was a sense of, in true authenticity, there is a true, I think, lineage piece that's there. And Kamar mentioned this. I think it was authentic for that Black professor at Cal State Hayward, now East Bay, to look at me and say, I'm responsible for you. Like, I'm responsible for your scholarship. Like, you are not, it ain't authentic for you to come here and show your ass. You know what I'm saying? What's authentic is you're going to tap into something that you didn't know you could tap into, but it's my responsibility to make sure you do that, and to make sure you do that knowing where you came from and knowing where this thought came from, and thinking higher of yourself. So when I'm talking about a specific professor as I'm in college and I'm relearning and unlearning things in a process that I'm still going through. And the people that we interviewed, y'all, there were 7-year-olds that was getting exposed to this. There were 6-year-olds that was being told, you know, what they meant to their community, and what their role, you know, would need to be, right? And so I'll go there because I know that there's a lot of places Kamar can go with it, but that's one of the things that it meant to me, was that it's not. I think we now look at authenticity as like you just saying some wild stuff, or, you know, coloring outside the lines, or whatever the case is. And I think authenticity means that there is an excellence that we have and that we're capable of, and I'm gonna believe in you. It's very different to be in an environment where it's like, I am pouring into you, you come from greatness, and this is what I think you can do, and I'm going to challenge you, and I'm not going to let you off the hook, versus my situation when I was in my public school, where I kind of came in as like I was a prisoner in San Quentin, where it was like, don't do that, take that hat off, take that, you know, don't get in trouble, we're going to send this person here. Like, it was very, you know, kind of a scare straight situation. Like, there are public schools that take Black kids on field trips to prisons. That's not authentic. That's destructive. And so that's how I was looking at it. But like I said, I know Kamar got a bunch of other places he can go with that.
Yeah, I want you to jump in, Kamar, but I want to say that's jacked up. You called it a scare straight type of schooling.
It happened.
Straight.
McClymonds High School, one of the oldest Black high schools in Oakland, used to take Black kids as seniors to San Quentin. And I understand the logic of why they did it. I just don't think that is reinforcing positive things in you to kind of excel in different kind of ways.
And that's a trip. And the trip there, and then think about how many kids hear messages about that's where you're going anyway. So I don't need to show up for you. I don't need to teach you. I don't need to support you, because this is what you deserve. This is what you're destined for. And how many times they get that message across 13 years. And
I love McClymonds High School, by the way, right? This is something that I know happened early in the early 2000s. Like, I know it because I had friends that went on that trip. But I'm just saying, it's, you know, but
that's so impactful though. Like, one of the things that we have said all along in this conversation, I've said it before, is the belief gap is one of the most pernicious things, period. The difference between what our children are capable of and what adults think they're capable of is like one of the most endemic problems that we have to solve for our kids right away. HBCUs take a good part of the belief gap off the table by having a long legacy of believing not only that Black people can learn, but also that the freedom of Black people is tied to them learning. So having that as your long pedagogical lineage gives you a leg up on other institutions, where the moment that the person walks through the door, the young Black person walks through the door, all of the deficit thinking kicks in and all of the awfulizing. And that's where it comes from when we see these videos on studies where they tell the teachers just to look at this group of kids and find every infraction that the kids are doing. They show them a group of kids where there are no infractions going on, but they can tell by eye tracking that all the eyes are going on the Black boys and on the Black girls and the Black kids specifically. Even though there are no infractions, the teachers still, when asked to do this in a study, find infractions because they're looking for the deficit. They're looking for the bad behavior. So if you take the belief gap off the table as like one of the predominant kind of features of a school or an educational institution, you do a lot. Like, just by getting that part, what they call the Pygmalion prophecy or whatever it is like what if you tell a teacher going into a classroom, these kids are all really gifted, you're going to need to up your game. Guess what happens? You could be putting them in a classroom of kids that aren't gifted, but they up their game. If you tell them that these kids are all remedial, even though they're not, they go into that classroom and they teach accordingly. It's just the way that it is. So I think that's so important. But this trip to San Quentin that you're talking about, Charles, like, this is where I have mixed politics, because part of me is like, somebody needs that trip. I don't know who it is, but I'm sure somebody listening to this is saying like there's a reason to do that. I'm also saying that there are a lot of kids that went on that trip that they did not need that trip. That was the opposite of what they needed. And you're trying to you're trying to put everybody in the same boat, and you're awfulizing all kids based upon what you think the kids with the most troubles need. And you're making everybody that. Anyways, I'm sorry. Kamar, jump in, brother, and take it from there.
Yeah, I think in the report where this conversation around authenticity comes out, probably the most poignant is just this contrast. And we know that we do this sometimes with Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, right? Within that, there's this underlying kind of foundational conversation around what does it mean to be authentically Black. I don't think that's what we're talking about in the report, right? Because no one actually owns the brand and the title and the distinction behind being able to define what it means to be Black. What we're lifting up is that even the debate between Booker T. Washington and Du Bois and that was all steeped in still white oppression. What we're naming in this is that, Wade Nobles talks about culture, and culture being it's like water to a fish, so that the fish is in its proper environment and water and can thrive, right? Without thinking, you can show up and just be. I can show up here on Freedom Friday and have this conversation with y'all and just be in a way that I'm not able to be when I leave here and I have to check in and go punch that clock. I have to be cognizant of those things. What these leaders have an opportunity to be able to do in these school sites is to be authentic to themselves and to show up and not have to second guess whether or not who they are and how they present themselves and the structures that they put in their schools, whether or not they will be second guessed by that. And so this ability to not only have autonomy, but also to pair that with authenticity. Charles started his, and I don't know what put this on his heart to be able to do this. He started his opening around jazz. Well, just an example of that culture and authenticity, instead of having a bell, and this might seem very, very simple, one of the leaders uses music as their transitional time, right? And is intentional about what that means and is reading the pulse of what's going on in the community and what's going on in the school, right? To be able to say, yeah, maybe something happened last night in the community. Instead of some turn up music and bringing the energy up, maybe we're gonna play some Cool Blue. We're gonna play some Miles Davis, culturally appropriate, right? But also intentional. And it's gonna set a vibe and a tone in my school that's authentic to these students and where they come from, but it has a purpose. And so it's authenticity with the purpose and to an end. And the most important thing is just to lift up is that they're able to just come and be in a way that they might not be able to do that in other spaces.
I think this, Sharif, you could talk a little bit about that point, just in the environment that you set up, like when you go to Freedom Schools, or when you go to Charles. You've heard me talk about Ile Omade. Our good friend Jamoke Hinton had me go to Ile Omade, and I didn't have to write anything about it. I just felt like I was there for a while, and I walked around, and I walked away thinking, well, damn, this is a different feeling than like when you visit a lot of places. It's one of those feelings like if I dropped my child into this, I feel like there's one thing I feel good about, like what they're feeding the kids, the attitude they're having with the kids, whatever. It just makes the kids are so that you could just see it in them. You can see it in their face. They're in their zone. They're in their place. Now, I don't like Sharif that at the Freedom Schools you make people dance in the morning, like the little kids. I'm warning everybody: if they ever invite you to Freedom Schools to come and read, ask them the details. Ask them the details. First of all, it's like 7 o'clock in the morning, which is culturally incompetent. And then when you get there, they're like, "You gonna dance, Mr. Stewart?" No, they don't ask. Then they put you in the middle, and you just have to dance.
You just said
right. So I did the Fred Sanford.
You did that.
Yeah.
Show the old
yeah. But anyways, do you see a connection with that, Sharif? Like we have Freedom Schools, and we should be talking about Black early start schools, early ed, and then we should be talking about what these brothers are talking about, K-12, the connection to the lineage, and then we got to get our HBCUs resourcing downward. I know that HBCUs are trying to survive, just to keep enough money in their coffers to stay alive or whatnot. But there does need to be some stronger, I think, pipeline behavior between the different apparatus of our education system, our Black education system.
Yeah, I agree. It really needs to be welded, and to drive home your point, Chris, around trying to survive. We're talking about like $13 billion of being underfunded. So consistently being underfunded. And yes, we still have these high expectations because we're desperately need them to drive it down even further and further and further. And you have some who do that, who have K-12 campuses. I'm excited about this work that UNCF is launching with our friend Naomi and Charter Collaborative and others, to really help weld that together more, so there's not this disconnect between, as you mentioned earlier, Chris, everybody doesn't go to college, right? And so sometimes when it's such a small percentage overall of people who are actually landing on a HBCU campus, in relation to the population of Black students, graduating high school, if we're not careful about it, then that can continuously be a deeper chasm than we'd like to see. And so finding ways to kind of bring them back together, action research, mentorship, teacher development, apprenticeships, right? Like K-12 institutions, out of school time opportunities, all these things, we have to really be, I think, extremely deliberate to make sure that there is not this chasm between who goes to college and who doesn't. That makes me really nervous. And we're recognizing just the systemic, consistent underfunding of HBCUs that makes sometimes it harder for them to show up that, many of the professors and leadership at HBCUs would want to. Just a consistent lack of funding, lack of opportunity, lack of research dollars, all those kind of things, and making sure HBCUs don't get sucked into just chasing the money, right? Because we have some who are we just want to chase STEM dollars and forget everybody who's not being prepared to access your new center for STEM that you have on campus. If you're not looking back and say okay, are they being prepared in K-12 spaces to benefit from this gleaming, beautiful, amazing STEM center that we're trying to produce, right? And so just making sure that we are pushing and challenge us as an overall community to not abandon. K-12 is a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. And so we can't just have this, Ebony Tower, that's separate and distant, both mentally and physically and intellectually and culturally, from the masses of K-12 students, the 8 million that we often talk about, 8 million Black students. They need to see themselves in deep connection with our HBCUs. And so we want to really, whatever we all can do to support that bridge.
As we get,
it's critical.
As we get to the end of the show, I'm going to choose violence on several different fronts. Just
choose violence in the middle, so we can
Let's
go ahead.
Just choose violence at the end, and this actually should get under Kamar's skin and Sharif's skin, because I've said this before. Sharif likes to talk about Philly all the time and whatnot. I just showed you some of the psychotic stuff that comes out of Philly or whatnot. But Philly is also important to Du Bois as a place of study and a thing to study, how the Black upper class and middle class and others actually interacted with each other. And there's always been this dynamic that I hate. I feel like you have to study all of your history and stop this duality thing, this Michael versus, or Michael, I was about to say Michael versus Prince, but Malcolm versus Martin and Du Bois versus Washington.
Booker T, yeah.
But I will say this much: Booker T. Washington won. He had the better plan, right? And this is why. Booker T. Washington, I've said this a lot, Sharif, you hate when I say this. While Du Bois was eating cucumber sandwiches up in the north with a whole bunch of college girls, Booker T. Washington was building 5,500 schools across the American South for K-12 kids, and then building colleges too. He was a builder. He was all that stuff y'all are talking about sounds great and sounds nice, but what I need to do is I need to get this money in the back door, and then I need to build something permanent that is a pipeline of our people, and it needs to reach the Black masses. It can't just be for the cucumber sandwich eating individuals talking about, well, we need to be closer to whiteness and white status, while he's talking about, no, we need institutions. We need to control the means of production. We need to build bricks that build the schools, right? I stayed in a Booker T. Washington house built by Tuskegee students, where the bricks of the house were built by the students. Every part, the mud, the concrete, all of it was built and owned by the students themselves. So every part of that house and that institution and the thing that was built and the buildings that still stand today, that people are still walking through today. And the reason I bring him up and bring this up right now to choose violence at the end of the show is because the focus on higher ed exclusively or primarily is our upper and middle class Black folks who are on the Du Bois nonsense. The focus on the complete pathway, the K-12 schools and higher ed for the Black masses, is a different ballgame. And when I look at this, our HBCUs are very important, but this report also is talking about Black educational leaders, their philosophy, where they get it from, and then what they do with it for younger children to get the masses. They're reading, we can't keep saying that not everybody's going to get to college. We can't keep saying that. We need builders. We need people who are building a physical building somewhere for K through 12 people, right? And it's just a blessing that they are steeped in the HBCU tradition and have those networks and come out of that, because now we're having a full picture. Now we can have a full discussion, because the college thing missed me. It missed a lot of people, right? I'm sure every one of you right now can count through some people in your life and in your family or whatnot where the whole college thing was not a for sure, and it was not, and it did not happen. So what happened in the K-12 experience? For most, it's starting to be a lot more are going, and even those that are going aren't coming out the other end with anything other than debt. Like they're not even, some of them are going in and not coming out with paper, but coming out with debt. So we have to talk about K-12 in a way. And that's why I think the blessing of this report is it's the full picture to me now. It's like full circle. This is going to get to more people. Anyways, brothers, do you want to push me back on any of that? Do you want to just okay. All right. Do it.
Go ahead, Kamar. I mean, I know you. I'll jump in.
I don't. Not right. Go ahead. You go first.
I think here. I mean, I think part of what we were trying to show is that there's love to be learned, and a lot. There's love for both of those brothers. I think you needed that. I think as a full Black people, you need. I think in the report we called them the brackets of like Black thought at the time. And I also think I do think that Booker T. Washington has gotten a large amount of hate and criticism, and even the way I was taught about Booker T. Washington in college, I think was kind of unfair to him, because it did not have the results. It just had the subservient kind of outlook on him, right? But I do think that when you were a slave who then became not a slave, who then had a vision and a plan around something, and you made different certain sacrifices to get those things to actually get results. I think that there's something to be said about having a plan versus, I don't really fit really easily into a lot of academia circles, because I do think a lot of those people look down on Black people. If you want to see some of the most anti-Black people, a lot of them are Black with degrees. I promise you that a lot of them are. Even when you talk about the time to test like commentary that both Booker T. Washington and Du Bois actually talked about, but they had spaces where they would debate these things. And I think that that's the lesson that we have to take. Like, where are the open air spaces for actual debate and actual thought? And I'm gonna just say this, Chris knows I use this term a lot. This is for the actually people. There's gonna be some actually people that's gonna point out, well, all HBCUs ain't that good, or Howard just had this thing where like kids didn't have X, Y, and Z, or whatever the case is, right? Like, nobody is saying that. What we were saying was that there is I'm looking at this as like at this HBCU report and this HBCU thought as concerted, fertile land of like critical and rigorous Black thought. What does that look like if you expand that to K-12? And what I mean by concerted, fertile land of Black thought, it don't mean that you're not finding great Black thought outside or in other places or in mixed spaces or in white spaces, but statistically speaking, just factually speaking, you have a weaker chance of finding that, as opposed to being in a place that is meant to produce that. That is the soil and the air that you're in. And what does it mean if we took that HBCU kind of mist and belief and just and those properties, those 5 characteristics that we found, what does it mean to actually disperse that throughout the country and through K-12 where your kids are getting introduced to that at a very early age? So, I think that you need both Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. I actually do. I think that there were some limiting things. I think that if you didn't understand the plan that Booker T. Washington was doing and you just read his stuff at face value of what he said or whatever the case is, I fully understand how you can feel a certain type of way, especially when the results aren't tied to it. And I think what Du Bois was showing at the time was this opulence, this black opulence of some sort that would be aspirational, where people can like, oh, I want to be a scholar because this is what scholars get to do, and they get to travel and they get to talk about these things. And they didn't always ask if you built something, right? Or how many things you were responsible for. And if you look at a lot of Black academia today and a lot of academia today, it is a lot of like bloviating and talking without the next question of, okay, so what did you do about it? How many lives have changed because of it? Oh, that, all right, cool. I think when you have to check jackets, I do think the conversation changes.
And Kamar, I'll bring you in. I want to rescue part of my point.
I'll never check my jacket.
Well, your jacket is undeniable, brother. You are getting.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a different jacket.
I will say this: Du Bois was a builder too. He built some intellectual scholarship. So I'm not trying to downplay that part. It's just the absence of the focus on the Black masses prevented him from actually thinking the institutional focus was necessary. And when you said that people, the way you were taught about Booker T. Washington was very clear, it was because you were taught by Du Boists. So Du Bois actually teaching Washington is actually a bad thing, right?
Now, I was talking about white people that didn't know what the hell they were talking about in general.
Well, and I will say Du Bois, this is what they do to the Booker. What they do to him is they play him off like he's Tim Scott. But somebody show me the Tim Scott HBCU. Somebody show me the Tim Scott School of Black Thought or Black Children. Show me so you can't you can't play him off like Booker T was just Tim Scott, right? He is not Tim Scott. Tim Scott don't have schools. He is not.
Did you set this up just so you can take that Tim shot, Scott?
Bruh, it's not just Tim.
I mean, you.
Like even when we talk about Ian Rowe, the thing I can say about Ian Rowe is at least I got to give it to him, whether I agree with his politics or not. He has a school. He has multiple schools. He has built schools, and he is building a full chain of schools. So maybe I disagree with him on politics, but at least like this playing the brother off like he was Tim Scott is anyways. But Kamar, jump in. I'll give you the last word on this part of how our legacy, because this is part of our legacy, these two thoughts that I introduce here. And one of them to me fits closer to your report in that we do need a pipeline. Like we need a full, a comprehensive set of learning opportunities from birth until college or through college.
Yeah, and I won't be long on this. We probably could get ready to make our next pivot. I won't add too much more upon what Charles said. I think that he kind of nailed it home, but I think that two things come to mind. One is just around, we talk about what it means to be authentic. I think really what we're also talking about is how do we define self-determination and what that means. I think both of them were self-determined, but we're taking different approaches. And then the second one is that, how do we behave and how do we act when we want to be validated? And I think that both of those two gentlemen were dealing with a particular point in time where they were both looking for validation in the wrong places. And I think that muddied in some regards some of their decision making, but who can blame them at that particular point in time? It's very easy now to look back and say, if I was in so-and-so seat, I would have executed and I would have ran the play this way. They didn't have that opportunity. They were trying to make do with what they had. And I just think, as I said, it brackets the conversation. Whether one's right or wrong, it really sets like a totem. And in between there's a lot of discourse in terms of where you might fall. But I don't think either one of those brothers can be faulted for their approaches. I just think it was just their way of getting that self-determination.
Thank you, Kamar. Thank you. I think sometimes, I think for both of those men, we flatten. And, when we teach our students about this, shout out to Abigail Henry, Africana Studies teacher at Shoemaker, how she would talk about is really Black thought, which is this continuum. And she would include Marcus Garvey, in this continuum of Black thought and, the scenarios that comes through. And, I think part of W.B. Du Bois. It's not like a finite spot on a map. It's more of a continuum. And I think one of the things he was really talking about was not only the self-determination, but accountability, which I think we all agree on. For those who have more, they should do more, right? Like lift as you climb. And I think he, in some aspects, maybe he said this, and not maybe, he underestimated, what, how much anti-Blackness, the level of, once you reach a certain point, are you more protective of that status than thinking of how many more people can I bring up with it, right? Like, so all of those complexities, and it's not just him and his philosophy, this is people even today, right? Like, this is human nature kind of stuff, and how his thinking evolved, and Booker's evolved, and Malcolm's and Martin, everybody that we put to say like, oh, look at these two polar opposites. When you really look at them, they're much closer, together than we would imagine on a, on the basic level, and, he's the father of sociology and sociological study. So that to me is also an institution, right? Like people are continuing to study. I think sometimes studying the wrong stuff and the wrong people studying the wrong stuff. But, just overall, I think just the complexities are so deep that it's, and it's worthy of critical analysis, so that we can learn from it and continue to build what they did and try to improve based on the context that we find ourselves in today.
Well, this has been great for the village. I appreciate this conversation. If you want cucumber sandwich recipes, reach out to Sharif El-Mekki. Sharif El-Mekki will get you the best.
Listen, let me just tell you real quickly. Once we were in Iran and I was starving, we were after school. My homie was like, "Yo, I'm gonna take. We're gonna get something to eat. We're going on some trip." I was like, "All right, bet." So I'm not gonna go home. I'm gonna go with you so I can get the best meal. Yo, my homie gave me a parsley, peppermint, cucumber sandwich. Bread was fresh, but I was so upset. Brother was hungry, and this is what he handed me. Just shout out to cucumber sandwiches. And shout out to Cheney U. I would be remiss, Chris, if we ended this and I didn't represent, where I got my, my degree and my principal certification from. Cheney University. Shout out to to the CU, Original Teacher College, and all the dope Black educators who, which used to be called African Institute, the African Institute, and later became Cheney University. And that is not our mascot. That we are the Wolves. You know what I mean? So I just want to. But shout out to Gritty. Listen, I love Gritty. I don't know why, Chris. Every once in a while he sends me this picture. Like I'm like, bro, that's dope.
You just randomly send the picture.
He just random. He like, he's just like, yo, what's the matter with y'all? You know what I mean? I'm just like, I kind of like Gritty. He's like,
oh man, my friend is sending me a good morning text. Oh no, it's just a picture.
No, it's Gritty.
No quote of Gritty.
Gritty makes me want to check in with my Philly folks and go, y'all okay? Y'all okay? Y'all all right?
Are y'all hostage?
Y'all. Well, anyways, listen to friends and family who come here on Fridays to have this communal learning opportunity with us. We appreciate you very much. These two brothers, Dr. Charles Cole and Kamar Ogwin, tell people how they can reach out to you and find you, because first of all, I don't want anybody connecting with me afterwards. I get sick of y'all. Where did they come from? Where did you say? Google. It's called Google. Google's your friend. But anyways, tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Well, you can go to the website, Charles Cole III, charlescoleiii.com, and it's right on the front page, along with other free things for the community. I believe in pamphlets. The leaders that I loved and looked up to made change Black society in this country through pamphlets. There you'll also find a free guide for Black boys who are going to be the first in their family to go to college. You can find a free workbook for Black parents that are trying to navigate a system that has not recognized or realized the potential that we saw from this HBCU report. So the report is there. You can connect with me there, and just thank you all for having me. And I wanted to just thank Kamar, who's been my friend since undergrad, and I just think he's a brilliant brother. Like, we really did Trojan horse an amazing history section in there that was ushered in by him. And so there are, from what you read in those pages, there are 100 stories that come out of there. So we wanted to, thank you for being part of this jazz band and in our Smoky Club tonight. I think it was some brilliance there. So
Smoky Club, that sounds
well. I think the most soulful. I think the most soulful music. When I think of like the Roaring 20s or You think
purple
about
lights
Billie
in the
Holiday.
background. Like,
It's the Smokey,
right.
yeah, the Smokey Club,
Oh,
man. I
okay,
think
all right.
where the improvisation, and it's the cornerstone of improvisation and brilliance. I appreciate classical music. I appreciate the artistry there, but it doesn't have the soul and the pain and the history embedded in the notes the way that I feel that those Smokey clubs do. Vis-a-vis, I think that this report has.
Yeah, you
Kamar,
might just want to explain stuff before you like, yeah, the club is Smokey, and I'm just like, yo, what my brother into these days?
Smokey Club. Everybody's
they don't exist no more, but yeah, that's why we try to recreate it.
That's because y'all be shooting them up. Anyways, Kamar,
That's
brother,
very
how can people get in
anti-black.
touch with you?
It's horrible.
Yeah, I'm very.
First of all,
I'm
it's
very
white
simple.
people shooting up clubs, but go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm very simple. You can email me at my company, hello@nyota.com. That's NYOTA HQ.com, Nyota HQ. And, my company is just all about producing, propagating, and protecting Black culture. Just reach out, say hello, and I'll be in contact with you. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks so much for the platform. And you brother, stay strong.
Come back anytime you have anything else to share and to teach. Because we want to do that as much as possible. Come back anytime that you need to communicate and platform yourself. All of these brothers know that my one thing is I care about. Here's the thing. Anybody listening to this and watching this, you two brothers are a perfect example. You could have said nothing. You could have lived the life that you lived and graduated and did your thing. And you could be working some little job somewhere right now and saying nothing. But what I think our salvation is tied up in a puzzle piece that is locked up in each person. And God has something in you that you're supposed to say. And whether you say it or not is your choice. Whether or not you do it or not is your choice. So when I started this show by saying I appreciate Black letters, it's because that's that puzzle piece that's in you that you're supposed to be communicating. And you can make a daily choice whether you're going to do it or not. But y'all made the choice to do it. And one of the things I want to say about that is when you look at a blank sheet of paper, and then you start putting letters on it and words on it, I don't think people acknowledge how grueling that can be, how much work this actually is. So this isn't a joke. This isn't a joke that y'all did this that you put this whole report together and did it. You overcame like one of the toughest things that people as writers know that there is. That's getting it on the page. Like getting it out of you and then shaping it up and then editing it and then re-editing it and then testing it and then thinking about it and whatever. So I appreciate y'all brothers for doing that. This is and I want you to tell other people the same thing. I want you to evangelize others. There's a story in you to tell it. God put something on your heart to say it. There's something you were supposed to be doing. And what I do is I build platforms. So any way I can help amplify it or get it out there, that's my job. That's what I do. I appreciate y'all, brothers, so much. This has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you're still not free. You're just not. But you know what? Hopefully you're freer after this hour with these brothers. Not with me so much because you know what? I'm just against all y'all. But anyways, these three brothers are smart and they know what they're doing. So follow them. Don't follow me. Appreciate y'all. We'll see you on another episode of the bro, listen, what was I about to say? Freedom Friday. Freedom Friday.
It's a habit. 200 episodes.